Y'all look ready, so let's get started. I think we got one seat up there, a couple over there, maybe one or two over here. So don't be shy about grabbing one of those, or you're welcome to come up and sit in the front. There's some room over here. Please make yourself comfortable. And for those of you that are new, the rule is there are no rules. The restroom remains open, the bar remains open, and we understand that sometimes people have other things they have to do, so they can only stay with us for part of the evening. So do not feel like you're stuck here. We don't lock the back door. At the end of the talk, if we have time, we'll take a few questions from the group, but I think one of the things that makes the Do Good Salon special is the opportunity to interact with the speaker after their talk. And so we like to have an opportunity, if there was something that either of our speakers talked about, you want to explore more, or you had a question that you didn't think needed to be yelled out to the group. I can't imagine that there's a question any of you have that you couldn't yell out to the group, but we will be here and would welcome those conversations. So I know most of you, but for those that I don't, my name's Alan Rothschild, and I was one of the founders of the Do Good Fund, and we are a nonprofit collection of Southern photography. And obviously, this is not part of our collection, but it is part of the wonderful collection of the Largen family, and Joe is going to represent the family and be one of our panelists today to talk a little bit about his journey with outsider art, or whatever the appropriate term is. We'll know at the end of our talk what we should be describing it as. But some of you will remember a couple of years ago we had the beautiful show of Butch Anthony's work, which was also from the Largen collection. And thank you so much for sharing the work with us. And he doesn't share it. He comes down here and helps us hang it, helps us pack it. He is the very enjoyable, hands-on person to work with, and we very much appreciate that. Joe's obviously been collecting Southern art for a long, long time. Really has a wonderful collection that spans a number of years of artist careers in the collection, and it's really enjoyable to see it all together, and it just looks great in this space. So thank you again, and we look forward to having you share some thoughts with us tonight. But we also have with us a first-timer. As a speaker, she actually came down for the Butch Anthony show. I think she snuck in one day when I wasn't here. But Katie Jentleson is joining us from Atlanta, and she is the Senior Curator of American Art and the Merrie and Dan Boone Curator of Folk and Self-Taught Art at the High. I bet you don't leave that on every phone message, right? She has been at the High for a number of years, and during her tenure as curator has really grown the collection of folk and outsider art, and is a real expert on this type of art. And as we were talking earlier, it's something that I think is underappreciated. It's real easy to look at this and think that it's just somebody playing around on the front porch of their house, but the depth and the stories and the talent in some of these artists always amazes me, and we look forward to hearing some stories. Katie got an undergraduate degree from Cornell, is that right? And then got her PhD at Duke. And her graduate work and her work as a professional curator has garnered many prestigious grants and funding opportunities and recognition of the important work that she's doing both personally and at the High. Our fellow, Emily Williams, who some of you may have met when she was here showing her work a few months ago, is back with us helping put together a turnkey show that we can loan to other institutions. But she's also doing about everything else that I can talk her into doing, and she put together a beautiful introduction for Katie, and I would love to read it all to you. But I also got on the phone today and called a couple of Katie's colleagues at the High, and I said, okay, I've got the formal introduction. Now I want to really know who Katie is. And they said she is the most competitive Halloween costume contestant at the High Museum. And she and one of our great friends, Maria Kelly, are always nose to nose as to who's going to have the best costume. But I also learned, and I should have figured this out, because if you go to her Instagram page, you see her profile picture. But I have been told she has a beautiful voice and is a mean karaoke participant. So what's your go-to song now?
I think in that picture I was singing Dead Flowers.
Okay. Well, so we'll later on, wherever the karaoke joint is in Columbus, you may find us there. Joe, thank you again. Thank your family for allowing you to spend as much time on this and with us. We appreciate it. And Katie, thank you, and the stage is yours.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Emily, for briefing Alan earlier, and Hallie and everybody who works here for the wonderful opportunity to come and speak to y'all. And thank you to Joe and the Largeman family for making this show possible and being such a generous donor, not just in terms of lending art to a place like the Do Good Fun Gallery, but we're very happy that Joe has also become a donor for the High Museum. And I'm going to speak a little bit at the end about some of the wonderful works by Finster and Butch Anthony that we brought into the collection thanks to Joe and the Largeman family's generosity. So you're here for that. And I'm starting out with a photograph since this is a photography collection. Next slide. And what I'm really aiming to do is to give you, as my title said, just some notes on Finster. As Alan said earlier, there's this tendency to assume that a lot of self-taught artists or outsider artists or whatever you do want to call them, I'm not going to give you the kind of secret answer to what you should be calling them, because the truth is none of the labels are really perfect. They all have good things about them. They all have bad things about them. But, you know, what they do on a very fundamental level is they draw our attention to the fact that these are artists who didn't go to art school, right? Like they didn't study art in a significant way. They may have had other artists who were friends. They may have learned art making in their family or larger community or through their occupations. But they were not getting BFAs, MFAs, and kind of entering these kinds of artistic milieu that so many great artists of many centuries come out of. So all to say that people assume that self-taught artists might not have a long-standing practice or a sophisticated practice, that they might just be doing things that like come to them randomly. And in fact, that's never the case. Like every self-taught artist has a kind of artistic journey that they've been on for a long time. And that's what I want to kind of reveal to you a little bit about with Finster tonight. This is a photograph by Guy Mendez, who's a wonderful photographer based in Lexington, Kentucky, who did a really extraordinary project in the late 80s and early 90s with Roger Manley, another extraordinary photographer and kind of person of many talents in the art world, and Jonathan Williams, who was the Jargon Press founder and Black Mountain College kind of poet and publisher. And they did this project where they documented artists from throughout the South and prepared a manuscript that was never or wasn't published until 2019, when it was finally published on the occasion of an exhibition that we did at the High called Way Out There. And the name of the book is called Walks to the Paradise Garden. And Finster is the kind of centerpiece, not this photograph, but another photograph on the cover. So this is Finster in Paradise Garden in 1982, and by this point he's been making this place for like almost 20 years. Next slide. And what I'm again trying to help you understand tonight are all of the ways that Finster was on this artistic journey before he had what became very well known as his kind of initiatory vision in 1976. Finster was born again around the age of 13. He was an itinerant preacher by the time he was 16. He was traveling all around the kind of tri-state area of Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee, working revivals. So you see him here with these big kind of large-scale river baptisms. He was writing columns for local newspapers, publishing his sermons and his ideas. He was even traveling around in a car with a loudspeaker that he would take to town squares and preach, at anyone who was around him. And so he was this kind of incredibly charismatic, extroverted figure as a Baptist preacher for decades before he became a family man. Next slide. And had to kind of settle down. He put down roots in Tryon, which is near Somerville, which is where Paradise Garden ultimately became a thing. And he was always making things. So it wasn't just this like performative, charismatic persona that he had. He was also very musical, but it was that he was always drawn to making things. And he would make signs for, his own congregations and other congregations. He would make these extraordinary sandcastles on trips to the beach with his family, so extraordinary that they drew the attention of the local news. Next slide. And he would build his children these extraordinary playhouses that were like these wedding cake-like structures that they and all the neighborhood children and all the children who were part of his congregation could play in together. And that led him to start thinking too about how he might draw more parishioners to his church. And he loved fun and he loved roadside attractions. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But he had this idea that if he could build a roadside attraction next to his church, it would bring more people in on Sundays. And so he started building this place called these things called the exhibit houses. And that's what he's kind of sitting on top of here. That's him on the left there. And that's another view of an exhibit house. And inside the exhibit houses, next slide, he was placing all of these objects that were things that he thought need to be preserved. He wanted to collect all of the inventions of mankind. And some things were things that he carved, like this little dog pencil holder that's in the middle. And in the back, there's a wonderful clock that is among the kind of case clocks that he would carve and sell at flea markets, also in this era of like the 1950s and early 60s. And in this piece over here, you can also see the kinds of handmade frames that he made for a lot of his artworks. So he was carving things, but a lot of the things that he was putting on these plaques in his exhibit house were not things he made. They were things that God had made, like that's a dried out ocean reed. They were things that were mass produced. This is a little like souvenir cup that someone probably gave to their father for Father's Day. And he just had this sense that the common man was not going to be remembered. Just think about all of the societal change that he experienced as somebody who went through the Great Depression, through World War II, and he just saw things changing so rapidly, and he felt this urge to kind of preserve, this like cultural preservationist urge that a lot of self-taught artists have. Next slide. For instance, Butch Anthony, that's definitely an impulse that he exercises at the Museum of Wonder, if you all have ever been there, but this need to preserve like specimens of the natural world, but also kind of things that have been thrown away, and to kind of put them on this altar and reframe them within this like museum that he's built himself. It's very much what's going on there. And then on the right is a detail from a Thornton Dial painted assemblage. Thornton Dial didn't make a museum in the way that Butch Anthony and Howard Finster did, but all of his paintings were kind of like museums. Like he would find things that had meaning to him and spoke to him, and he would arrange them, into these new works of art that carried with them, the past lives of these objects that he was preserving. Next slide. And so this is Finster kind of saying the thing that he was doing, right? This notion that I took the pieces you threw away and put them together by night and day, washed by rain, dried by sun, a million pieces all in one. That was kind of his motto. And and this is a sign that he made ultimately for Paradise Garden that's now in the Heist collection. But what he found to be true was that there were so many things that were important and that needed this preservation. He couldn't make enough of those little shelves for them. So next slide. He starts kind of changing his tactics entirely. And at Paradise Garden, he builds these mosaic structures, walls and sidewalks. And he just sticks the things that he's trying to save and reuse directly into the concrete. And that's part of what he's doing, right? This place is a place of preservation. This place is a place of reuse and recycling. And it's also a place to spread the word of God, right? And you see that I took the pieces sign right there. And in front of that are a calf and a lion who are laying together. This is from the book of Isaiah. It's the moment of the peaceable kingdom when the Messiah comes. So he did have this like religious always desire to spread the gospel and to bring people closer to the word of God. But what he was doing at Paradise Garden and in all of the work around you, you can see it goes so far beyond that. It really kind of blends secular and religious references and impulses. Over here, this painted and carved wood sign, that's a portrait of Henry Ford. He was obsessed with Henry Ford, not only because Henry Ford was a great inventor, but he also had a major collection of material culture called Greenfield Village that still exists. So just to say that he was very interested in people who had that kind of innovative, creative spirit. Next slide. And here's an up-close view of today. Like that photograph was from the 70s, but this is a lot of the concrete mosaics are still there. We have the director of the Paradise Garden Foundation, Tina Cox, here in the audience with us tonight, doing hard work to preserve Paradise Garden in situ. Yay. And you can, if you haven't been there, you can still go there. And again, almost all of these structures that he built are still there, and they're just absolutely amazing. And then Tina is about to open the World's Folk Art Church in June? June 22nd. So this is a huge deal. This is this major structure that Howard Finster built that nobody has legally been allowed to go in for many years. And it closed it in 1999. He started building it in 1982 with a grant. Next slide. Okay, a pause on that. But just to say, the World's Folk Art Church has been restored, and so that's even if you've been to Paradise Garden, there's a reason to go back. There's always reasons to go back, but something very exciting happening. This is another place that you might or might not have been to, called the Ave Maria Grotto in Cullman, Alabama. And Finster saw this place, and so this is a place that was started being constructed kind of at the turn of the 20th century by Brother Joseph Zodel, who was a Benedictine monk. This is a Benedictine monastery on the site of a Benedictine monastery that was founded in Cullman, Alabama in the 19th century. And he built this amazing series of grottos that are all remaking all of the major cathedrals and pilgrimage sites of the Christian world in miniature. Next slide. And Finster definitely went there, like his family remembers him going there, but they remember it happening later, but I'm sure he saw it because it was done by the 1950s. And again, he was traveling as an itinerant preacher all around all these different states, including Alabama. And so on the left is a picture of something from the Ave Maria Grotto, and on the right is a picture of a mosaic wall from Finster's, Paradise Garden. So you can just see the kind of likeness of these types of structures. Next slide. But a thing that differed, again, Finster definitely had things within the garden that were quoting from scripture and, recreating characters from the Bible, but he was also just having a lot of fun. Like a lot of what he did at the garden was just about fun, including the mirror house, which was like the original infinity room before Yayoi Kusama, and you can still go in this place and see like a million reflections of yourself. Next slide. He loved having fun. Like he would go to Six Flags with his family. He would go to Rock City. He experienced, all of these different places all across the Southeast as a lover of fun. And that was really part of what was driving what was happening at Paradise Garden. Next slide. So all of this is happening. Like this is happening from 1965 on. He's draining this site. He's building this site. He's hard at work. He's driving his family crazy because he's enlisting their help and everyone in their neighborhood. This is a very residential area. Everyone thinks he's crazy, even though he's, been a preacher within the community. And so it's a lot. And then something big happens at the end of 1975. Next slide. He gets into Esquire magazine. There's this kind of picture story that looks at a few different art environments across the South. And it includes Paradise Garden, which he wasn't calling Paradise Garden at that point. He called it a lot of different things, but this was the article that kind of gave that name to it, the Garden of Paradise. And so this happens in December of 75. 1 month later, he has this vision. So next slide. He's painting a bicycle, and he was doing this all the time for kids in the neighborhood. It was and still is not an affluent community. It's a poor Appalachian community. And so he was always trying to give neighborhood children and his own children, fix up bicycles. And he was painting a bicycle, and he got a little spot of paint on his finger. Next slide. And you can see in the wings of this angel, I hope you can see a little bit, there's all these little faces, and they're made in little fingerprints. And that's what he saw on his finger that day, was this little face in the spot of paint, and it commanded him to create 5,000 works of sacred art. And so that was his mandate. Next slide. And he would do that, I think, I forget now, I didn't brush up on this. Did he create 5,000 by 1982? Or?
It was pretty quickly, no.
Yeah, okay.
It was pretty quickly, because then, of course, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
I mean,
He did it quickly, and then by 1989, he exceeded that. He'd created 10,000. So that angel that I just showed you, that was like his 10,000th work by 1989. And he would go on to make 46,991 works of art. And that excludes a lot of what you're seeing in here, because these are all seriographs. Like these were singular objects that he made. And in the bottom of that slide, you can see he would write on the objects, like 432nd painting, that one says. And then above it is an image of a door that we have at the High that was taken out of, he didn't have like a studio. He had a lot of little outbuildings that he was always working in. And it was from one of those buildings. And you can see that he had this kind of running ledger of like what number he was on. So he'd write it on the work, and then he would keep running ledgers on doors, on boxes, like there's all kinds of objects where you see like him kind of tallying everything up. And then this is a piece of sidewalk that is in the High's collection now. And it's him saying Howard's tools after joining Artist's World discarded. So he made that mosaic as a way of saying, I'm joining the artist world now. This is like 1976. I have this vision. I'm in the artist world, even though, again, the point of what I'm trying to tell you is that he was in the artist world for decades before that. But this was just the moment that the story kind of got its start, was in 1976. And then beyond that is another mosaic that he made where he's talking about getting this big grant from the NEA to build the world's folk art church, which is what we're talking about being restored finally this summer. Next slide. So the High has this extraordinary collection of Howard Finster's work, because in the 90s, when Howard was still alive, still working, he was only at 10,000 in 1989, and by the time he died in 2001, he was almost at 50,000, right? So he was still very active, but there was like a kind of concern that what's going to happen to this place after I die, that started emerging in the 90s. And the High had emerged a little bit by that point as being an institution that was taking self-taught artists seriously. Like, we collected our first work by a self-taught artist in 1975. We did this major acquisition of work by Bill Traylor, who you see on the right, in the 1980s. But we weren't like we didn't have a collection, we didn't have a curator like we do now. It wasn't all established at that point. But what's interesting is that there started to be all this coverage about like what's going to happen to the garden. Is Paradise Lost? And next slide. We had a director at the time who was this guy Ned Rifkin, who was not from the South and came from DC, but had been in New York City, where there had been like a great love of Finster in the 1980s. So when our director had been a young curator working at the New Museum in the 1980s, there was Finster had a solo show, and Finster was in like the Venice Biennale Pavilion. So Ned like knew who Howard Finster was in this way that was very unusual. And it led to, next slide, this thing, the Paradise Project, with which Tina and Valley and Lynn, so 3 audience members and maybe more people who I don't know, were all involved in. This was this massive project where hundreds of objects came out of the garden, were conserved. His vast archives of like the stencils that he used to make his work and all these other kinds of things came to the High. They're now at University of Georgia. But also say it was like this unprecedented thing that the High and really most museums had never done, which is like, how do we try to preserve a critical mass of objects from an art environment? We also have Michael McFalls in the audience from CSU and Passaquan, and somebody else who really knows, as Tina does, about this like need to find places where you can preserve objects that will not only be like safe in the kind of storage and display environment that museums can provide, but also museums have a lot of foot traffic, right? Like the High gets 55,000 school children every year, and hundreds of thousands of other visitors, and not, it's not as heavily trafficked at the sites that artists make in more far-flung places. And so anyway, Finster understood all of that. He wanted there to be like a legacy for Paradise Garden in Atlanta, where a lot of people were going to appreciate it. And that happened with the Paradise Project. Next slide. And then starting in 1996, which was Howard's, his birth date is like a little dubious, but it was his 80th birthday, and the High threw a big party for him with an exhibition, and that's like a drawing of what the installation was supposed to look like. And then the High expanded its building in 2005. It reopened with this like kind of permanent display of Finster's work, which was great, but it was like a little bit like hard to get to and a little bit claustrophobic. And it also, a thing that I really struggled with was that it had this old color photograph of Paradise Garden that made it feel like this place didn't exist anymore when it does. Next slide. So we reinstalled the gallery in 2018. It's not just this gallery, and that's like a very bad, me making a panoramic image, but we always have Howard's work on view in this and another gallery, and it appears elsewhere in the museum as well. And we have a video that also, instead of the photo mural, gives a lot of images of Paradise Garden and even gives some great like archival footage of Finster being crazy on the Johnny Carson show and making people laugh and sing. And it gives people a more alive experience of who Finster was, and that Paradise Garden still exists and all that sort of thing. Next slide. So we're very excited because I met Joe a number of years ago, and he explained to me about this wonderful collection that he's been building of so many artists. And as Alan said, there's some other artists on view back here. There's Purvis Young and Butch Anthony and John Henry Toney. And so Joe invited me to kind of get to know the collection a little bit. And with the High, we have so much because we did establish a collection and we did establish a curatorship in the 90s. And so especially when it comes to Southern self-taught artists, it's like we've got a lot. And so when I'm looking at things to acquire as a curator, it has to be like really exceptional, especially when it comes to Finster, because he made so many things and we have so many things already. But Joe had these shoes, which is what you see in the center. And they say, "Don't mash my heart, I love you. Don't mash my toes, I love you," which is just like a very sweet and very Finster kind of note to make. And I loved them because Finster had, again, going back to what I was talking about as a preacher, and he had this very charismatic performative style that was also true about what he would wear. And so in this self-portrait that he made, he is wearing this blue suit that Thelma, one of his daughters, made him. And she made like marching band costumes and was a seamstress who was doing all these kinds of, really colorful polyester type uniform things. And he loved that suit, right? That was like one of the things that he showed up in all the time. He made that's a hat we have in our collection. It's a briefcase. And so my hope is that we'll be able to have a display probably next to his self-portrait where we have a mannequin that's like wearing. We're also working on some other donors to give other Finster decorated articles of clothing. So, but that's a thing that you can look forward to hopefully in the future. Next slide. That's just another kind of closer view of those things. Next slide. And then we were also super lucky that Joe wanted to make sure that we were able to represent Butch Anthony at the museum because we'd never had anything by him, and he's a very important Southern artist as well. And I went to the drive-through museum, the Museum of Wonder, and it was a great experience. And I chose these three kind of curio boxes from Joe's collection because to me they represent, I like to choose things when an artist is building an environment. I really like to have things that like embody or what the environment is about, right? And so the Museum of Wonder is like all of these collections of objects, right? And they also demonstrate Butch Anthony's interest in taxidermy and that sort of thing. And so I wanted to have objects that kind of distill that, right? Like, so we can't give people the full Museum of Wonder at the High, but we can kind of show them what it's all about, like in a single object with something like this. Because he does wonderful paintings and other things too, but these are more like about, again, this kind of cultural preservationist impulse that I think is the most interesting thing about a lot of self-taught artists' work. And I think that's pretty much all I've got for you, but I'd love to invite Joe, I think, up to talk a little bit about your collection and what's drawn you to Finster. And yeah, if we can pull a chair around. Yeah, of course. Oh, good. That's the goal.
So, and also thanks to the Do Good for setting this all up and putting this together. Our job is pretty easy, coming down and dropping it off. And the Butch Anthony's, there was a lot more intensive. We had curio cabinet, all day to break down and all day to set up. So it's
Yeah.
a breeze compared to that. I like what you said about Butch's work. That actually had on the back Museum of Wonder. These are like permanent exhibits in the Museum of Wonder. He's rearranged things, but he's willing to let those go at one point. Probably he'd still do that.
Yeah.
But just briefly, because we want to like mingle and check out the art and maybe listen to some of Howard Finster's music. Katie mentioned that he was also a musician. He produced a record in 1981, and we'll get to this later, but it was produced by Victor Vicento and Jake Goldwasser, who's been helping us out with the collection. Also, he did a digital recording of this vinyl record, and there's a code that you can scan it and listen to the digital copy. So we welcome that. But the first Finster that we ever acquired was back in college, 1984, when he did the cover art for REM's record Reckoning. And it was a great blend of Southern folk art and Southern folk music. There's this new folk trend going on in the music scene. So it was exciting, and checked out the artist. And the following year, when Talking Heads came out with, those were wearing some of the Talking Heads pins from that record, Little Creatures, that propelled Finster and Talking Heads into great stardom. It won album cover of the year back in 1985. And got him noticed. But before that, he was on as Katie said, he was on the Carson show in 1981 when he was get up singing banjo. It's a real character. The first piece of real art that we bought for him was at Finster Fest 1997, and in 1998 we were 2 years in. We picked up 4 or 5 pieces, these little cutouts and these little cutouts back there, and I thought they were so much fun. And we had this old farmhouse up in Hamilton that had some walls, and we started filling it up with fun, colorful folk art. And one catalyst was the River Fest we had at Folklife Village, and there was folk artists from all over the South came. I wish they still did it. It was about 50 or 100. It was full up in there. And we met, so we found out about Paradise Gardens, so we got to go check that out. Of course, we made it up there. Met Howard when he was still alive in 97 and 98. When did he pass away? 2001. So towards the end of his life, he was still cranking out. One of the fascinating things I found out, if you look at all these pieces, he puts his numeration that he puts on there kind of fascinating. Like if it's 4,200, we'll write 4,000.200. So he also puts the time of day that he does. They're almost all after midnight. Like 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. This guy's working throughout the night. Trying to make it his wife crazy. Like when did you have time for it? Making art all fascinating how much he did. But still, 4,000 pieces of art. If you think about it, that's not even enough for one piece of art for everyone in Columbus. I mean, so it's still kind of rare.
Yeah.
Spread out all over the world like this, and it was hard to find the original work. So we got fascinated with some of the graphic works that are kind of hard to find. Some of them, but they're bright and colorful. They represent his art. We live in and there's some of these are like a sermon, on canvas.
But obviously, we'll be reading everything, and the best pieces in the whole room is your Halloween book.
Oh,
One that we like to do. This is all enamel on the board. All enamel. It's a very big piece.
Right. This is the oldest one.
It's down there.
Right.
Down there.
I think the oldest piece we have is from 1984. This Twilight of Ice. That's an interesting piece because it was rescued from a gallery in New Orleans that went through the flood, the hurricane Katrina. So they showed a picture of it when it's pristine, and they were having this art sale. It all got water damage from the hurricane, and so we preserved it the best we could, and framed it up. So it has some damage to it, but it's still part of folk art.
Yeah.
So that was our journey, and that was about 30 years ago. And one or two pieces a year over 30 years, so it's out of control. So our good friend Jay Goldwasser, who did the digital recording, also would like to say a word about the music side of things, what he's doing with presenting Howard Finster's music online.
Cool.
Jay, join us here. Thanks, Don. Hi, everybody. My name is Jay Goldwasser, and I've been doing some work with the Large Family Collection for the past couple of months. And recently, as you guys can see up on the wall over here, in 1981, Howard Finster produced it for the Victor Jacinto, actually completing the big gallery for us university. Victor Jacinto was the head and startup of that gallery, and one of the big shows that kind of got it on its way was this large Howard exposition. And so this piece over here is on the wall next to it now. It's the Sound of Howard Finster Visions. And this particular piece is actually a print that was later serialized after the original 200 production. And Victor and Howard did this really just kind of fun, natural sound recording together. And I got to meet Victor recently, talk about this. We were building this, not only this exhibit to come here to do good fun, but also to give a new space for this music. Some of my musicological work has been more instrument specific, in the saxophones and the early American instruments. But to help rebuild this story was an absolute blast. So like we said, the album is now available to hear just about everyone. There's some cards by the table. But the cool part about this, when you take, for example, the different versions of how you come to find lyrics, whether it's through an album cover, whether it's through the vast collection of research around artists and how they come into their own stories, the cross medium is something that I love to teach about. I work with young students and college students alike to rebuild instrumental pedagogy. So what does it mean when you hear something like this from an artist that we know from these imageries, to hear their own sound of music? What is that story that they really want to tell? So the Sound of Howard Finster is technically one of 3 full-length albums that Howard did in his career. The first one was First and Seven Folkways, technically published after this one, which predates the history of his music a little bit. But it's this very early, in that 2000 range of artworks in the first 5,000. So it's a very pure Howard finding out his sound with his groove.
feeling when I sing. I hope you have it when you listen. So I hope you guys enjoy the sound of it as well. But it's such a fun experience to not only know an artist as a musician, but an artist as a painter, as an illustrator, to give that context to not only the feeling that we see, but that we can hear. It's been a blast in that process. Some of the stories that Victor shared about the early Howard, the Cadillac is still at the Gardens. Yeah. It was a gift from Victor who was saying that in the many drives back and forth from Winston-Salem to Somerville, the Cadillac kind of gave out. He said that the V8 was one of about 6 cylinders. At that point, Howard was like, "What are you going to do with that?" I said, "You know what? I'm going to leave it here." And then it became a beautiful piece of artwork, like so many other incredible found objects in gardens. But it was a special. I'm just kind of thankful that it's smiling, not only to preserve one story, but Victor, as an artist himself, was a really cool individual and created quite an interesting body of work. And to hear about their friendship, especially as it grew throughout the years for such a long time, and the transition from the Jeffrey Camp era into the later parts of Howard and the family craziness, it's always special, as I say, to tell those stories, share those stories, and now preserve them and represent them in the future. So if you have any questions about the record afterwards, I won't take more time. I get excited when I start talking about music lessons. Don't let me get off that. But yes, it's more than available, and thrilled that you guys are all here. I think this incredible collection of art. And yes, that's my little piece. My name's Jake. Thank you all.
Well,
We'll do a little quick Q&A. Have cocktails and more intimate conversation. Anybody got questions for Katie? Joe?
With your research into self-taught artists, other than like the formless artists, what do you think they all have?
that's a great question. I think it's the same thing that like all artists have in common, whether they like get training or not, right? Which is that they just see the world differently, and they have a kind of compulsion or calling to see that through in some way. Like and again, like so many self-taught artists knew from childhood that they had this kind of special gift, that there was something different about them. And then trained artists too, like can remember, the first drawings that they made or like the moments that they had growing up. So I think it's this like deeply rooted creativity and again, way of seeing the world, and it's a way of seeing the world and a compulsion to have to do it, right? Like to not just let that artistic voice that like, Picasso was, I think, the one who famously said like everyone's born a child and then we're forced to grow out of it. I mean, sorry, all children are born artists and they're forced to grow out of it. So like real artists don't, right? And no matter what obstacles they face in their life and lack of resources, lack of encouragement from their family, their community, they still have to make something. Yeah.
This is a question.
That's fine.
I didn't know this, but it's starting to come up. It came to my mind, like, I guess it's happened with that too. How internationally found the arts words? How do we take it? Like,
a lot of them got, like, there were a lot of NEA folk art fellowships. I don't think that's what Howard got. I think he just got a straight, was it a folk art? Victor, okay. Yeah, I mean, by the 80s, Finster was like not just a part of like the Wake Forest, like North Carolina community, but UGA, like, like so that makes sense. But there are a lot of artists, self-taught artists that got grants from the NEA that were like folk artist grants. But I think, again, somebody had to tell them, like, you can do this, you can apply. Right. Right. It became the what? I'm sorry. Oh, with that money. Okay. Something.
Any more? All right. Well, we've got plenty of food and plenty of cocktails. And thank you all for coming. Katie, thank you. Joe, thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.